TV is conducting an overseas TV viewer survey to provide you with a better global broadcast service. Share your valuable feedback on the Arirang TV website www.arirang.com or mobile application. Survey participants will be selected at random to receive special gifts. 2025 Arirang Overseas TV Viewer Survey. We look forward to hearing from you.
In our headlines on this Thursday, July 31st, here in South Korea. South Korean exports headed for the American market will face 15% import duties from the Trump administration, according to the much-anticipated tariff deal between Seoul and Washington. And President Lee Jae-myung says this latest trade agreement serves to remove uncertainties in the export arena for local businesses as he prepares to meet with his U.S. counterpart in August. Meanwhile, the Lee administration is looking to raise corporate tax back to 25% as part of a fiscal reform plan aimed at addressing a substantial shortfall in tax revenue. Today, we start with team coverage of the trade accord signed by South Korea and the U.S. First then, our Park Jun-han covers the details of the deal that includes U.S. tariffs lowered to 15% for South Korean products. Do take a listen.
South Korea and the U.S. announced a major tariff agreement on Wednesday local time to lower reciprocal tariffs from 25% to 15%. The deal, however, required South Korea to commit to a $350 billion investment package. The $350 billion will be in the form of an investment vehicle and will be spent through equity investments, loans, and credit guarantees. An additional $100 billion will be spent on purchasing U.S. energy, mostly liquefied natural gas. The South Korean government said sector-specific tariffs involving semiconductors and pharmaceuticals are guaranteed most favored nation status, ensuring treatment as favorable as that afforded to other nations.
So we've made sure that if we face tariffs in the future on things like semiconductors or pharmaceuticals, we'll receive the same treatment as most favored nation level, ensuring we're not at a disadvantage compared to other countries' agreements.
Through the deal, tariffs on automobiles have also been reduced from the current 25% to 15%. Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Economy and Finance Koo Yoon-chul commented after the agreement that South Korea's shipbuilding project, which involves large-scale investments by South Korean private shipbuilders in the U.S., played a key role in the tariff negotiations.
The most noble part of today's agreement is the $150 billion South Korea-U.S. shipbuilding cooperation package, a project called Make American Shipbuilding Great Again.
This agreement will fund new U.S. shipyard construction, workforce training, supply chain rebuilding, and ship maintenance, leveraging South Korea's shipbuilding expertise. The remaining $200 billion will be spent to support strategic sectors that are closely related to the country's economic security. Those sectors include semiconductors, batteries, nuclear energy, biotechnology, and critical minerals. South Korea also pledged to purchase $100 billion worth of U.S. energy, primarily liquefied natural gas, over 4 years, redirecting existing import needs without any added economic burden. The last-minute tariffs agreement has reduced uncertainty for South Korean companies, which account for 19% of the country's global exports, ensuring they compete on equal or better terms than their rivals. Further details about the deal will be finalized in ongoing talks. Park Jun-han, Arirang News.
Now that a tariff deal has been sealed with the U.S., what are its broader implications? Our economic correspondent Kim Do-yeon tells us.
While a framework has been reached on tariffs, dealing with tariffs is far from over. Deputy Prime Minister for Finance Koo Yoon-chul told reporters that key details still need to be finalized, particularly regarding the $200 billion investment portion of the $350 billion package. As part of the deal, tariffs on most South Korean goods will increase from 0 to 15%.
A 15% tariff is undoubtedly challenging, especially for a country that has a free trade agreement with the US. But if our companies can leverage their creativity and competitiveness, this could turn into a new opportunity. While the broader agreement is done, we will continue to work out the specifics through further talks with the US.
Among the headline agreements is MASCA, a strategic shipbuilding initiative led by South Korea and backed by $150 billion in investment. This stands in contrast to the remaining $200 billion, which will be largely controlled by the US. The Korean government has emphasized this distinction, especially in light of comparisons with Japan's deal. Tokyo pledged a $550 billion investment, and when the deal was announced, President Trump claimed that 90% of the profit would go to the US. South Korean officials also underscore the size.
South Korea has a trade surplus of $66 billion with the US, while Japan's is around $68.5 billion. Yet our total investment fund is smaller. If we exclude the $150 billion led by our own companies, our actual contribution is $200 billion, just 36% the size of Japan's.
On the tariff side, the increase from 0 to 15% marks a significant shift. When it comes to cars, an industry with fierce competition, while Korean cars were tariff-free, their competitors, Japan and the EU, paid 2.5%. Now that advantage has disappeared, leveling the playing field in terms of price competitiveness. Agriculture and livestock market access, a contentious issue, was not included in the deal, despite strong pressure from the US. Officials revealed that during negotiations, they presented a photo from the 2008 mass protests in South Korea against US beef imports, which drew over 10 million demonstrators, reminding US officials it's a red line for them. On another side note, while President Trump did not meet with any other trade delegations, he made time to meet with South Korean officials. He later said this was a sign of his respect for South Korea. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
Right, so what is the presidential office saying about the efforts of its top economic delegation to seal a deal with the US ahead of Friday's deadline? To answer this question and more, I have Arirang's Yoon Jung-min standing by live at the Yongsan office. Jung-min, welcome. So let's begin with the president's response to the trade deal.
Sunny, President Lee said the deal has eliminated uncertainties in export conditions and that South Korea has crossed a major hurdle. Take a listen.
국익 중심의 유연한 실용 외교를 통해서 급변하는 대외 환경의 파고를 슬기롭게 넘어가야 될 것입니다.
Presiding over a weekly meeting with his aides on Thursday, the president instructed the officials to fully prepare for follow-up measures, as well as long-term tasks, such as expanding consumption at home and diversifying export markets. He added he expects South Korea and the U.S. to further strengthen their economic cooperation and alliance. Taking to social media earlier, he noted the investment fund worth $350 billion will solidify the foundation of bilateral cooperation in shipbuilding, semiconductors, and rechargeable batteries, among others. In particular, he added $150 billion will be solely committed to shipbuilding to help Korean shipbuilders make inroads into the U.S.
Right. Jung-min, meanwhile, what's the latest regarding the proposed summit between the president and his U.S. counterpart?
Right, so the two leaders' first face-to-face talks are expected within 2 weeks, according to the Presidential Chief of Staff for Policy, Kim Yong-bum.
I heard President Trump ask Secretary Rubio to set a date for next week, but considering schedules, it'll take place within 2 weeks.
With a major diplomatic challenge somewhat removed, summit diplomacy between South Korea and the U.S. is expected to pick up speed, which has been stalled since President Lee Jae-myung took office in June. Details of the summit, including the date, could be discussed when South Korea's Foreign Minister Cho Hyun meets his U.S. counterpart Marco Rubio in Washington on Thursday local time. The summit agenda is expected to include setting details of the framework deal. Security issues such as the allies' defense cost sharing and purchasing U.S.-made weapons were not addressed this time, but they could be brought up when the two leaders meet. Earlier this morning, South Korea's Defense Minister An Kyu-baek spoke over the phone with U.S. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, where they agreed to modernize the alliance and expand cooperation in shipbuilding. Back to you, Sunny.
All right, Jung-min, thank you for that coverage. That was our Yoon Jung-min with the response from the presidential office regarding Seoul's trade deal with Washington. And as our Jung-min just mentioned, Foreign Minister Cho Hyun is set to sit down with his American counterpart Marco Rubio in Washington, D.C. on Thursday, local time. The meeting will mark their first face-to-face as top diplomats and follows the recently concluded trade talks between their two administrations. On their agenda are prospects of a summit between their leaders at the White House within the next 2 weeks, as shared by the U.S. leader on his social media platform on Wednesday. Meanwhile, the National Assembly here stands poles apart in its response to news of a trade deal between Seoul and Washington. The ruling Democratic Party welcomed the deal, calling it a rewarding result of productive protection of national interests and a tangible feat of the president's pragmatic diplomacy. DP floor leader Kim Byung-gi said Thursday the deal would bolster the bilateral alliance as well as broader trade ties. Meanwhile, the main opposition People Power Party voiced concern that South Korea may have made excessive concessions while acknowledging that the 15% U.S. tariff rate was reasonable. PP floor leader Song Eun-seok underscored that the value of the pledged investment in and imports from the U.S. surpassed the country's foreign exchange reserves. Earlier on this Thursday, President Lee Jae-myung presided over his first workshop with government officials to share the new administration's approach to state governance. Addressing an audience of 280 people, he stressed that public service should be grounded in serving the people. He further emphasized that tangible change depends on those putting policies into practice on the ground. To take a listen.
저는 대체적으로 한 3가지 정도가 중요하다. 방향, 자세 이런 거죠. 마인드, 기본적인 마인드. 공직자란 뭐냐? 공직자는 국민을 위한 봉사자라고 헌법에 써놨죠. 그리고 저는 제가 비록 국민에게 선택받은, 국민에게 위임받은 대통령이라고 하지만 제가 할 수 있는 일은 거의 없어요. 다 여러분 또는 여러분들이 다시 또 위임한 공직자들, 공무원들을 통해서 할 수밖에 없습니다. 여러분들은 몸통이고 실체죠. 저는 머리 좋게 말하면 아니면 사고와 가치 같은 허상에 가까운 거죠. 실체는 여러분들이에요.
He also called for the elimination of policy audits, finding fault with the retrospective punishment of civil servants for policy decisions. The government is looking to reform its fiscal policy to address a substantial shortfall in tax revenue. Our finance correspondent Moon Ji-young has details.
The 2025 tax reform bill introduces a mix of targeted tax credits for strategic industries and welfare, alongside adjustments to corporate and capital gains taxes.
Over the past 3 years, our tax revenue base has weakened rapidly, leading to a significant drop in the tax burden ratio. Therefore, this year's tax reform bill prioritizes reinforcing the weakened tax revenue base for fiscal sustainability, while also supporting economic strength and stabilizing people's livelihoods.
The reform package aims to enhance tax credits for R&D and investment in future strategic industries, including AI. Furthermore, to enhance K-content competitiveness, tax credits for webtoons will be newly introduced, and tax support for video content creation will be expanded. Beyond these targeted incentives, the framework includes tax cuts designed to encourage corporate payouts and boost the stock market. Specifically, to encourage high dividends, a separate taxation system for dividend income from high dividend companies is being introduced. This approach excludes these dividends from the comprehensive financial income tax base, allowing earnings from stock dividends to be taxed independently rather than combined with other income. Despite the debate over tax cuts for the super-rich, a 35% tax rate is expected to be applied to the highest dividend income bracket. On the other hand, the bill aims to restore tax equity and rebuild the nation's revenue base based on the principle of ability to pay. The country's corporate tax rate will be raised by 1 percentage point across the board, with the top corporate rate increasing to 25%, effectively reversing a cut introduced by the previous administration. The bill also tightens capital gains tax rules by lowering the threshold for major shareholders. While currently only those holding 5 billion won, or roughly $3.6 million in a single listed stock are taxed, that threshold will be reduced to 1 billion won, or just under $720,000. Tax support will be expanded for low and middle-income households, with measures such as an increase in the income deduction limit for credit card use by up to 500,000 won, or roughly $360, depending on the number of children for families. The tax burden on self-employed individuals and small business owners is also expected to be alleviated. The bill will first go through cabinet meetings before being submitted to the National Assembly for final approval. 문지영, Arirang News.
In other news, the U.S. Federal Reserve has decided to hold steady its benchmark interest rate for the 5th session in a row. Our Lee Seung-jae reports.
As widely anticipated, the U.S. Federal Reserve left its interest rates unchanged on Wednesday, holding its benchmark lending rate steady in the 4.25 to 4.5% range.
Today, the Federal Open Market Committee decided to leave our policy interest rate unchanged. We believe that the current stance of monetary policy leaves us well positioned to respond in a timely way to potential economic developments.
According to Powell, the U.S. Fed remains firmly focused on the dual mandate of maximum employment and stable prices, stressing that the economy is in a solid position despite ongoing uncertainty. He added that the unemployment rate remains low and that the labor market is considered at or near full employment, while inflation is running slightly above the Fed's 2% long-term target. The latest decision also came despite recent public pressure from President Donald Trump urging a rate cut. And earlier on Wednesday, Trump blamed Powell for the high interest rates, stressing that they hurt the American people.
Each point that this gentleman keeps up costs us $365 billion a year. Think of that. 1 point, $365 billion. If you bring it down a point, we save 365. We should be the lowest interest rate, and we're not. We're 38, number 38, because of the Fed. It's all because of the Fed. He's done a bad job. Now he's got to...
In a rare move, 2 Republican-appointed Fed governors, Christopher Waller and Michelle Bowman, dissented, signaling their preference for a rate cut of 25 basis points. That marks the first time since 1993 that 2 Fed governors have dissented on the same rate decision. Waller argued that while tariffs may temporarily push prices higher, the inflation impact will be short-lived, with levels returning to normal by next year. The next FOMC meeting is slated for September, with many anticipating a rate cut during the 6th scheduled meeting of the year. The rate freeze means the rate gap with the Bank of Korea stands at 1.75 to 2%. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Back on the local front, Samsung Electronics has recorded a second quarter operating profit of 4.7 trillion Korean won, or $3.4 billion. Now, this is a 55% plunge on year and over 21% lower than market projections.
Officials are linking the weak numbers to the company's chip division, where operating profit plummeted about 94% in the second quarter on year. Yet despite the slowing profit, overall chip sales rose 11% on year, driven by demand for premium server chips and increased foundry orders. Meanwhile, findings by Statistics Korea show industrial output rebounding in June for the first time in 3 months. Analysts are linking the rebound to the semiconductor and automobile sectors. Consumer spending also gained ground for the first time in 4 months, with clothing and cosmetics driving up sales. In contrast, facility investment remained in negative territory, extending its fall for the 4th month in a row. On the international front, Canada is the latest country to show intentions to recognize Palestine as a state amid Israel's continued military offensive in Gaza. Our An Sung-jin explains.
Canada says it plans to join several countries in formally recognizing Palestine as a state. According to Prime Minister Mark Carney during a cabinet meeting on Wednesday, Canada intends to do so at a meeting of the UN General Assembly in September this year, as long as preconditions are met.
This intention is predicated on the Palestinian Authority's commitment to much-needed reforms, including commitments by the Palestinian Authority's President Abbas to fundamentally reform its governance, to hold general elections in 2026 in which Hamas can play no part, and to demilitarize the Palestinian state.
Canada also signed the New York Call, a joint statement of the ministers of foreign affairs from 15 countries, including Australia, France, and Spain, that calls for an immediate ceasefire, release of hostages, and a two-state solution where Israel and Palestine live within secure and recognized borders. Conditions in Gaza remain dire. Israeli soldiers reportedly killed at least 48 Palestinians. According to Associated Press on Wednesday, IDF soldiers opened fire on a crowd at a key gateway for aid trucks at a checkpoint in the north of the Strip. This incident comes as Trump's special envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, is headed to Israel for talks on the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. UN agencies have repeatedly stated that the population has already exceeded the threshold for famine in the Gaza Strip. Han Sung-jin, Arirang News.
The intentions of a North Korean man to defect to South Korea have been confirmed by officials here. According to the Unification Ministry on this Thursday, the confirmation follows a comprehensive investigation. The North Korean man reportedly crossed the border on July 3rd and was taken into custody by South Korean troops. He is now under South Korean government protection and set to enter the country's standard resettlement program. Disaster management authorities and pundits from the Asia-Pacific are currently gathered here in South Korea to address strategic cooperation against calamities. Our Shin Ha-young reports.
Natural disasters, including floods and earthquakes, continue to threaten millions around the world, and Asia-Pacific economies are no exception. Amid these challenges, South Korea's Ministry of the Interior and Safety is hosting this year's APEC meetings on disasters in the western port city of Incheon from Wednesday, with disaster management officials and experts from across the Asia-Pacific participating to strengthen cooperation on risk reduction. As part of the 3 days of meetings, the Emergency Preparedness Working Group convened on Wednesday to explore ways to strengthen practical cooperation with a focus on digital tools for disaster risk management. The Senior Disaster Management Officials Forum, scheduled for Thursday, is expected to build on those discussions and work toward actionable policy steps and stronger joint responses to emerging threats.
The key focus of this conference is to strengthen international cooperation in responding to complex disasters, such as climate change and pandemics. With its advanced ICT capabilities, South Korea has a well-developed early warning system and is well-positioned to contribute to global efforts, including the UN's Early Warning for All initiative.
Alongside the meetings, the Interior Ministry is partnering with New Zealand's National Emergency Management Agency to conduct joint disaster drills, collaborate on research, and share information regularly to help reduce disaster risks.
But from an emergency management perspective, the knowledge and the advancements that Korea has well in advance of New Zealand. We're really looking forward to understanding that, how we can share knowledge, how we can share our experiences to make both countries stronger, particularly, as I said earlier, in the light of the changing hazardscape that we all face.
A disaster safety exhibition featuring Korea's latest technologies will be open through Sunday, highlighting the country's innovations and efforts to expand its presence in the global disaster tech market. 신하영, 아리랑 뉴스.
The intense heat continues to grip the entire nation. Tomorrow brings more of the same: scorching sun, sweltering air, and no sign of relief just yet. The extreme heat will persist, with daytime temperatures once again reaching above 35 degrees Celsius in many regions. And many of us in the capital area felt a lot of relief today thanks to that cloud coverage. But there will be nothing but sunshine tomorrow, with very strong UV rays nationwide. Tropical nights are expected to continue. Here in the capital area, it seems like we are having the roughest summer this year, with a low of 28 degrees here in Seoul tomorrow morning, Chuncheon, Daejeon at 25 degrees. Then by the afternoon, most regions will see highs soaring to 36 degrees Celsius. Then around the middle of next week, rainfall is expected in the central regions, which may help ease the extreme heat that's gripped the nation for weeks. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
Right, those are the headlines at this hour here in South Korea. Coming up next is our daily panel session. Do stay with us, and thank you for now.
Celebrates the 80th anniversary of liberation. A place filled with culture, history, and diverse experiences. This is the Independence Hall of Korea. Upholding the values of the independence movement, and together with the whole nation, we will make Korea great. The Independence Hall of Korea.
미래를 준비하는 코딩 교육 전문가.
Change the way you start skincare. 7 vegan peptide, maximum benefits for your skin. And amplify the effect of the next skincare step. Boosting, glowing, and brightening. Effortless care. Visible results. 7 vegan peptide booster. Mizone.
On Press Perspective today, we touch upon the power of a South Korean passport and the popularity of its apartments. Do stay with us. Hello and welcome to yet another edition of Press Perspective. It's Thursday, July 31st here in Seoul. I'm Min Sun-hee. It's time for our talk on issues of social interest here that made international headlines as well. For more on this, I have Anna with French weekly paper La Tribune Dimanche here in the studio. Anna, welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here today.
I also have writer Colin with us with the pundit's take on the day's discussion. Colin, it's great to have you here.
Glad to be here.
Right, Colin, we will start with you today. So the peak holiday period here in South Korea is late July to early August. You've been here for a while now, about a decade, right,
Yes,
Colin?
yes.
And could you share with us perhaps one memorable way of how you indulged in the season?
Well, you learn a certain concept here if you stay here long enough. Actually, you learn it pretty quickly. The cultural idea of 이열치열, which is fight heat with heat. When it's hot, eat something hot. That's usually what it comes down to. Is when people talk about 이열치열, they mean eat something hot during times that it's hot. And right now, it's the hottest time of the summer. As you say, the period is late July to early August. That's the vacation time and somewhat not coincidentally also the hottest time of the summer. So we have these 3 days in Korea, the hottest days, Chobok, Jungbok, Malbok. We just passed Jungbok. Malbok's coming up, I want to say the 9th of August. These are the days we eat samgyetang. This is a dish some viewers may be familiar with. It's a chicken soup, which doesn't sound that exciting when you say it like that, but it's not sort of the chicken soup a Westerner would know from childhood out of a can. It's chicken soup, Korean style. You've got the stone pot, or some made of something typically fairly hard, so it retains the heat. You've got a whole chicken in there, and the chicken is stuffed with rice, with ginseng, with jujube, with various ingredients, and there are different versions you can order. It's very hot. It's served with all the steam coming out of it. That's when you eat it, right that moment when it's the hottest, when it's also the hottest day of the year. So that's hence the association samgyetang with these 3 hottest days, Chobok, Jungbok, Malbok. So if you haven't had your samgyetang yet, or if you've never tried it, August 9th, I think it is, for Malbok, could be the day to have it. You know, you can have a true Korean experience, even at a Korean restaurant, not in Korea. Maybe, you know, if you have enough Korean people in your area, there might be a samgyetang place. That could give you a sort of a taste of Korean culture without having to go very far.
Have you had your samgyetang this season?
I've missed out for various reasons of, you know, preparing for my wife to give birth to twins, but maybe Malbok, I'm going to get home and tell her. We've got to have some on Malbok.
Fingers crossed for that.
Indeed.
Right, and quite a number of South Koreans also seek to go abroad for their summer vacation, and findings show that the South Korean passport, it currently ranks 2nd in terms of global power. What would you say is the significance of this finding?
Well, indeed, the South Korean passport ranked second at the Hinley Passport Index. So basically, this index looks at how powerful passports are over the world, like over 200 countries. So more specifically, the South Korean passport, it moved up from the third to the second place, and it's giving now access to 190 countries without needing a visa in advance, and it's tied with the Japanese passport. So the thing is, like, a strong passport basically shows how far the country's influence goes. So I think that for South Korea, this high rank means that, like, it shows its diplomatic influence all over the global stage, and it shows how strong its economic and political partnerships are, especially because, like, visa-free agreements are based on mutual reciprocity and are closely tied to geopolitical relations. And one thing that is really remarkable here is that the South Korean passport is now ahead of several European countries such as France, Germany, and also like Finland, Ireland. So I think that for South Koreans it means a lot of freedom to travel, but for the country it's also a big advantage in terms of tourism and economic appeal. And personally, when I heard about this, I was thinking that this high ranking really echoes to the country's growing cultural influence all over the world. We all know that South Korea is known for its strong soft power driven by K-pop, K-dramas and everything. So yeah, I think it really echoes to this growing influence that goes way beyond Asia.
Right, and standing at the top, it's the Singaporean passport, is it?
Yes, the first one is the Singaporean.
And the second place is South Korea, neighbouring Japan, tied at number 2. Right. Colin, let's now talk about another headline related to South Korea by the foreign media. The LA Times carried a rather interesting piece about the popularity of apartments here in South Korea as opposed to individual homes, which is the case over in the U.S. What are your thoughts on this discrepancy? Yes, this is a subject that foreign writers on Korea have come back to over and over again through the years. And I do feel like when I see a story like this, especially when I look at the photos, I always have to tell people, Seoul doesn't really look like the photos you see. Typically the coverage, at least the visual coverage, makes Seoul look like it's just these miles and miles of unrelieved, giant, featureless, all identical apartment blocks. There are parts that are like that, but that's not really a picture of the whole city, though one does get that impression reading about Seoul abroad. Regardless, the living situation implied is, I mean, it's a little better than the one implied, but really, yes, as you point out, there is a discrepancy between maybe how Americans see forms of housing and how Koreans do. And in the U.S., the word apartment has this connotation like, well, it's a place you rent when you're young until you are financially stable enough to buy a detached home and actually be the owner and sort of own land as well. That's the whole idea, part of the much mythologized American dream, I suppose. And in a way, it's not so different in Korea because despite the vast majority of the population in Seoul living in apartments, they are also purchasing them as investments. I mean, buying a home in the U.S. is the main way people invest their money. It's the main way, as is often said, that people have built wealth over the past few generations. Here in Korea, too, if you can buy an apartment, don't even bother about the rent you can make from it. It's the gains on the capital itself have been, over the past few decades, enough to justify the purchase, whatever you have to do to get it. But as we've talked about often on this show, the population isn't growing as it used to. And really, these apartments date from an era when the South Korean population was exploding, and even more Seoul's population. People rushing towards Seoul after the war, and when in Seoul, reproducing in great numbers, much greater than today. You had to house these people, and the way to do that was determined to be large apartment complexes, 10 stories, 20 stories, 30 stories. 5 buildings, 10 buildings, 20 buildings, all together. And to an American or to an Englishman, this can look a little dystopian sometimes, but it has been in many ways a very effective solution to deal with a fast-growing population in a very rapidly industrializing and developing country. Now, my mind goes to this book by a writer named Michael Booth. He's from England. He wrote a book about Korea, Japan, Taiwan, and China and their relationship, their geopolitical relationship. And he has a section on Korea where he's driving through the countryside. And even in the countryside, you see these big apartment complexes. You'll see just mountains, little hills, fields,
rice paddies, or not necessarily rice paddies, but you'll see agricultural land, and then suddenly out will rise this patch of giant concrete apartment buildings, and he'll say, why do I dislike these so much? What's the problem? You know, and he says it's the numbers. The numbers on the side always bother foreigners who are here for the first time, because they think, or psychologically it's like, something so big should be recognizable for how big it is, yet these also need numbers. So it's a mismatch between the two concepts. But I think for the most part, these apartment buildings have been fairly comfortable with generation upon generation. They've improved, and you can always tell how old a building is just based on the structure it is, the structure it has, the form it takes, the size. And you know, for a while there, since the late 60s when they came out, when they first started being built, you know, you'd see an apartment building built in 1968 was not as good as the one built in 1975, was not as good as the one built in 1980. The comfort of the apartments, of the complexes, would reflect the rise in the standard of living, which was pretty much in lockstep for not everybody, but the majority of the country. The quality of life for the working person in Korea was getting better year on year in that period. That's a little more complex now, and you don't see the same generational change in housing. But in a way, if you look at the old buildings that still stand in Korea, you can see almost a history of the country's development since not that long after the Korean War.
Right. Well, and Colin has touched upon the reason behind the popularity of apartments here, but perhaps you can go back to that particular article by the LA Times and tell us a bit about what it pinpoints as the reason behind the popularity of apartments here in South Korea.
Yeah, like one very practical reason why these apartments are so popular among South Korean people is how convenient they are. They are built to make life easier, to make the daily life easier. Like they are built as ready-made to give like a ready-made life. Like they usually come with parkings, gyms, daycare center, senior centers, even cafe for mom to gather and to chat. And they also have a pleasant environment. Like they have landscape gardens with artificial waterfalls and even playgrounds. There is also like another thing from a social point of view. Living in those big complexes guarantees a certain level of social interaction, and I think it is quite important in a country where there is over 500,000 of young people who are sad, suffering from loneliness. And it's not even like only me saying that. It's even the South Korean media. They started referring to it as a loneliness epidemic. So, for example, in this article, there is a 29-year-old IT specialist. He said he really likes how easy it is to interact with his neighbor thanks to a well-managed online community within the complex. And yes, another key point is that these complexes, which are often built by the South Korean biggest conglomerates such as Samsung and Hyundai, they have come to symbolize social success and financial stability. So living in one of them has become like typical path to success in South Korea, which is basically get into a top company, then land a job in the big conglomerate, and eventually move into these apartment complexes. So yeah, as Colin said, I think the symbolism goes to it goes back to how the country urbanized in the 1960s and 70s. Yeah, because back then, in response to the civil housing shortage caused by the rapid industrialization and the population boom, the apartment complexes have become really popular among the middle and upper classes.
Right. You've been here less than a year in the country, right? What was your first impression of this preferred residential preference that Koreans had, the apartments?
Well, coming from France and having lived in Paris for my entire life, except some international internships and international studies abroad, I would say that I was quite surprised to see how apartment in Korea are seen as prestigious, because yes, for example, in Paris, prestige would come from owning a house, especially in Paris, owning a house would be like the ultimate dream, a house with a garden. So yeah, I think that for me it was quite a cultural shock to understand this. Yeah.
Right, so like Colin said, the apartment has a slightly negative connotation and you would...
It's not the goal.
Right, it's not the goal. The actual goal would be to have like a single individual house then.
That's the American dream, so they tell me.
Right. Colin, what do you suppose has been the impact of such similar lifestyles or residential areas on the Korean society?
Yeah, what is notable for those who haven't visited Korean apartments is each generation of apartment building, the floor plans are basically the same. So you kind of know how an apartment's going to look if you see the outside of the building. And then if you go in, people can decorate any way they like, people can order any furniture they like, but somehow they always seem to get a very similar couch, they always seem to hang a very similar TV across from the couch and the table between. I mean, you're not going to see a lot of variation. So yes, these are, in a way, the only choice. These apartments are the only choice for housing, but also people, when given their free choice, furnish them very similarly and use them very similarly. I mean, there are not huge variations in what people do with them. So, you know, in this article from the Los Angeles Times, or that was published in the Los Angeles Times, they had one of the expert quotes from a Korean professor. He expressed some concern that the similarity of these buildings led to, or sort of made lives more similar, which if you are an architect, it's tempting to believe in the power of architecture to shape lives. And to an extent, it's probably true. But I would also look at it the other way and see it as a reflection of the society itself. This is a society where people in general don't necessarily, they might mind things about their apartments. They might not like certain things. But I never hear among the complaints that they're too similar. That's never that. The similarity makes them more easily tradable. I mean, they're good financial instruments, as we've been saying. For that reason, they're almost commodities. If you know where the building is generally and what year it was constructed, you know basically what the value is going to be, and to an extent have been able to predict that value and the rise in that value. So the similarity, I don't know if that causes similarity in lifestyles. It might be the other way around, that lifestyles were not necessarily similar enough, but people were sort of willing to put themselves on certain tracks that made it possible for these buildings to be constructed at such a large scale in Korea. I mean, it is a mass society, but a mass society in a very different way than, say, the U.S. or France is a mass society.
Right, and speaking about the society here, Anna, a new study by Statistics Korea shows South Koreans are sleeping less and we are spending much more time on screens. Could you tell us a bit more about this particular study, and what are your observations with regard to the daily impact of smartphones on South Koreans?
Yeah, well, the survey released by Statistics Korea showed that the average amount of time sleeping is down by 8 minutes a day. So now it dropped to 8 hours and 4 minutes a day. And this is the first time that the sleep duration has decreased in South Korea since this survey began in 1999. So it is a big reversal in a long-term trend in South Korea because over the years, South Korean people used to sleep more and more longer over the years, and like an official from Statistics Korea say that this could be linked to lifestyle changes, and in particular he pointed out that time spent on media use increased compared to 5 years, and which likely affected overall sleeping duration. And just to give you some figures, the average South Korean now spends 5 hours and 8 minutes a day on leisure activity, and more than half of that time goes to media consumption, including watching YouTube. So as for my own observation as a French correspondent who recently settled in Seoul, I can say that the relationship South Koreans have with technologies, smartphones and screens was quite a cultural shock for me at the beginning. For example, you know, in Seoul, you have the traffic lights signals who are built into the ground. So for me, it's really a big example of how the city has to adapt itself to this hyper-connectivity lifestyle. And also when, in the subway, you can see everybody has their head down on their phone, their eyes locked up on their screens, and during the entire ride, and barely looks up. So yes, as a foreigner who recently arrived in South Korea, this is definitely something you notice. Yes, so I can say that when I arrived, this hyperconnectivity lifestyle, it was really something I felt right away when I arrived.
Right. And now what's the last thing you look at before you fall asleep?
Maybe it's my smartphone.
Your smartphone,
yes.
Right? Colin, is that the case for you
sure.
as well? What's the last thing you look at before you fall asleep?
Typically, yeah, I save messages that I'm sending to people in the West for the last moment, because it's when it's a more reasonable time there. So it's like, read whatever I'm reading, and then before I go to sleep, go on WhatsApp, send the messages, and then I'm done.
So the last thing you do see is the screen of your smartphone then? Do ask me what I look at the last. My husband's face,
Indeed.
not my smartphone.
Indeed. He's watching, right?
Right. Colin, staying with this study by Statistics Korea, we are also reportedly spending less time on meals and choosing to dine alone. What are your takeaways with regard to this reality?
Well, we could tie this into the discussion of apartments, because there is a concern. Now, Seoul's apartment market is still very strong, you could say, to the point where you could call it a housing crisis in that they're so expensive, which is the same thing you hear in many American cities with many fewer apartment buildings, including Los Angeles, whose newspaper ran this article. That's part of the reason, I suspect. And so there's this sense like, yes, prices are getting higher and higher, worse and worse, you could say, but inevitably this is going to stop. It has to stop because family sizes are getting smaller. So some of these apartments, many are built for families of 4, and there are not so many families of 4. I mean, even if a couple has kids, they don't usually have to have 2 kids. I mean, they might have 1, and then if they have 2, they might not be looking to buy a big apartment on the 30th story. So there's the sense that yes, the family size is decreasing. There are more 1-person households or 2-person households, but more to the point, there are 1-person households, which means there are more 1-person meals going on, whether inside the home or outside of it. And there's a whole word for this now. Any phenomenon in Korea, any social change or phenomenon gets its own word, usually a contraction. 혼밥 is the word I'm thinking of. 혼자, bap meaning a meal, 혼자 meaning alone. And there have been restaurants advertising themselves as being good for 혼밥. And as a freelancer, I do eat plenty of 혼밥. I was doing it right before I came here, in fact, eating at a cafe by Nambu Station, but usually I'm working while I do it. So it's sort of like, how to put it, it doesn't feel like it's so much of a social phenomenon as a professional one. I've got things I got to get done, and somehow it's got to happen while I'm eating. Right. And for many Koreans, it might be the same.
Right, for convenience, quite
indeed,
a number of
indeed.
them.
The convenience is all. As we've said about the apartments or the eating alone or whatever it might be, it always wins the day in Korea.
Right, especially in modern Korea. All right, I'm afraid that's all the time we have. Colin, as always, thank you so much for your insights.
Thank you.
And Anna, thank you very much for your time and thoughts.
Thank you.
Right, on that note, we end this edition of Press Perspective. Do join us again same time tomorrow as we touch upon South Korea's tariff deal with the U.S. Thank you for now.